weirdos.
Weird science is the revolution. Weird science is the revolution.
Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Weird Science Comics YouTube channel, where we'll talk about the breaking news. And I don't have my breaking news sound effects, so we'll hit this. Breaking news, everyone. The Tim Drake Robin book has been canceled and will end with June's number 10 issue. And this is not any surprise to anybody. The book has not sold. It fell out of the top 200 books, and a book can't continue if that's the case. But while I'll welcome and really encourage people to tell me what they thought of the book and what's going on with all of this down in the comments below, please don't just come in with the slogan, "Get woke, go broke." It drives me nuts, and it drives me nuts because that ends up just giving fuel to DC and their writers to keep doing what is the real problem here, writing characters they don't know and not being able to tell a comic book story. And why I end up saying that, and why I hope that people do think a little deeper into this than that "get woke, go broke" nonsense, is that if you look at this Tim Drake series, and if we have a fan cut, I've actually watched the fan cut of The Phantom Menace where there's no Jar Jar, right? Pretty cool. But if you take a fan cut and don't change the overall story structure, nothing is changed except you take everything about Tim Drake's sexuality, take all of that out of the book. It's never mentioned. It's in the background, whatever. It's still an awful book that failed. It's still a book that didn't deserve 10 issues. The story has been a convoluted mess, overly convoluted for how basic it's been. The character work is nil. You end up having pacing and story progression that is mind-bogglingly bad. And top that off with the shit on the top of the crap sundae. Riley Rossimo, for the most part, his art, awful. You ended up having everybody in the book look like mannequins that were melting. And to top that off, you end up having a Tim Drake who look like a young Selena Kyle. I don't get it. So it's not just the "get woke, go broke." And when you say that, if you still say to me, no, that's the only thing wrong with this book. I mean, first off, you probably didn't read it, and you may not have read it because you found out that Tim Drake was bisexual. And yes, the idea that you ended up having DC and Megan FitzMartin change Tim Drake to be bisexual, that is a factor. I'm not going to pretend it isn't, but it's not the only factor, and there's bigger factors that need to be changed by DC. But again, my second deal is if you just think, that if you say, no, it's all because Tim Drake was bisexual, that's why it failed, I will argue with you that you are ridiculous and as narrow-minded as Megan FitzMartin and DC, thinking that the only reason it'll succeed is because they made Tim Drake bisexual. Between those polar opposites, there's a shitty story with shitty art in between. And that's what really is the problem here, and why I hope, because again, we're talking about this, the book is canceled. So I'm hoping what this means is that DC have learned their lessons, and the lessons here are you need to know the characters. If you're going to change a character, damn well you better know that character to make that change fit. And anything can happen, any character can change. But you need to know the basis of the character first to work that change and make it fit and work. And I think that the play here is a lot of times recently, new writers have come in. I don't think that the editors are, well versed in the characters themselves. I don't think the editors know even the continuity that they're dealing with. And there's many, many examples of that. And then in the end of the deal, you have these new writers. They change the character as a shortcut to not having to learn about the character. So when you do that, though, you're only going to focus on the change. You're only going to focus on what you changed. And it's not just sexuality here. I'll tell you, that is a big, big argument for what Brian Michael Bendis has always done but also what he specifically did when he came over to DC. He changed things to make the characters his own. I have an air quotes, but also then to make a shortcut so I don't have to learn about the character's past. Too much to learn there. I can go forward because I'm going to do my version. But that version tramples all over the old. It just doesn't work that way. Another book that this was a problem with in my mind was the Clune-Red's Batgirls book. They ended up doing a interview at one point before the book came out and said, oh, yeah, Steph and Cass, 13 years old. And then people called them out. What are you talking about? These and oh, no, we misspoke. They misquoted us. They ended up saying that. But if you read the Batgirls book, those two characters, Cass and Steph, they both were Batgirls, all right? They both were kick-ass. Cass, one of the most kick-ass characters in the DCU. At points, Batman's afraid that Cass would be able to just rip him apart. And yet in that Batgirls book, you don't ever feel like anything happened before. You end up having the Clune-Reds write it as if they don't know that anything happened before. And surprise, surprise, Batgirls was canceled as well. So this is what happens. That is a recipe for disaster, and you need to know the characters. And back to the whole Tim Drake Robin. Megan FitzMartin, red flags went up all over the place even before this series when people read that Dark Crisis Young Justice book. That book was horrible. It was one of the worst books of the last bunch of years. And again, I don't get the concept, but Megan FitzMartin came into that book with a vendetta, with a chip on her shoulder against fans of the team that she was going to write, and seemed to be there to tell fans of the team that she's writing that they're pieces of shit for liking the character, that they have toxic nostalgia, and then suddenly wonders why people don't like the book. But on top of that, you can't come in and say, oh, you're wrong about a character, but yet you don't ever show that you yourself know the character. And back to the whole sexuality thing. Yeah, when they had the idea, hey, Tim Drake is bisexual, a lot of people ended up saying, I'm not going to read this book. And that's something where you just got to look at yourself in the mirror for reasons that you did or didn't do something like that. But if you did give the book a chance and say, okay, I don't know that this makes sense, but let me see how it works into the story. Let me see what Megan FitzMartin is doing to prove that, okay, she knows the character and this makes sense. All right, let's go. You never had that point. You never had the point, and it felt like the only thing that she was concentrating on, or, one, at least half, 50%, was the idea that Tim Drake was bisexual. And so let's take this around in different deals here. If they end up where they have a kid, an open call for Batman writers. Hey, everybody, we were going to do this. We think this is the way we're going to go forward. It's almost like when they have the open tryouts for the NFL. I show up, I almost die because I'm so out of shape, stuff like. So I go into this and they sit me down and say, okay, Jimmy Burrito Arms, what do you know about Batman? What do you have? What is your story that you want to tell? And I'm like, I don't know about story, but I know that the Batman likes to nail the broads. Like that's not good enough. That's not going to be something that should get me a job. Just because I know the sexuality of Batman doesn't mean, and it's funny because, again, a lot of times with these characters, you think about what makes the character great, what ends up giving you great stories. And most characters that you think of, the sexuality of the character rarely ever comes into play. Now, with that, I understand the representation and the diversity of all of this, but that's not that can't be the driving factor of your story or your concept of a character. And without knowing the character, it just ends up, it's going to feel forced, whether you have great intentions or not, whether you're trying to force it, it's going to feel that way because you just don't get the character. If you're going to come in with this sort of change of any kind, not just saying sexuality, but if you're going to change a character inherently, you better be able to show people that you know the character that, from the base level up. You can't change things without knowing what you're changing. And so this was, in my mind, it was bound to fail. And I could tell from the first issue or so, because the story writing, I don't know that Megan FitzMartin is fully grasping how to write a comic book. I'm not going to say that she's a bad writer. I'm going to say that the concept that, again, comic books have a different pacing than novels. They have a different progression. You have different lay of the land. That's why I think a lot of people are coming from, say, the movies or cartoons or whatever. Yeah, they may have the concept of the characters even then, but they might not get the whole pacing of it. I'll tell you, somebody that people end up liking enough did end up telling me, and it's Brian Hill, who ended up doing Batman and the Outsiders. He did the X-Men stuff and some other stuff as well. And he's gotten better and better. He actually told me during the time where he was writing Batman and the Outsiders that he was struggling a bit with the pacing of a comic book coming from, the visual medium. And so there is a learning curve. And that's the other thing with this. When DC gets these writers, maybe they need to have some sort of mentorship. Maybe they need to learn some things before you end up just throwing them to the wolves. And I mean, the wolves, I can even say, are the editors, because they don't know anything. The continuity and all, I already said it, is a complete mess. But back to everything else. I said this was going to be a bit scattered, but there you go. The whole deal, Tim Drake Robin, it's been canceled. It's a shame for fans of the character. They might not like this version, but it's a shame because you always worry that when a book fails like this, the higher ups, they don't quite grasp why it failed. So they end up just thinking that, oh, Tim Drake can't carry a book. He has before, and he's a great character. But please, DC, hopefully this is them getting rid of this Tim Drake book, getting rid of Batgirls. The Clunrads are already off Wonder Woman. You have to get writers that are passionate about the characters, but they also have to know these characters. And please, please show them how to write a comic book. But that's it. That is it for me. I hope that, everybody enjoyed this, and you can let me know. I probably angered a lot of people as well, but just off the cuff talk. So with all that, please, again, subscribe, enable the notifications, like the video, and please let me know what you think of all this in the comments below. But with that, I am going to bid you adieu, and I will talk to you all later.
You are all weirdos.
Weird science is the revolution. Weird science is the revolution.